A girl with cancer was selling lemonade to pay for her chemotherapy. Passers-by hardly noticed her until Big Shaq walked by. What happened next shocked everyone. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching this video from. The summer heat in Atlanta was relentless, pressing down on the city like a thick, smothering blanket. The air shimmered above the asphalt, the heat waves distorting the view like ripples in a pond. Cars moved sluggishly through the streets, their windows rolled up tight against the oppressive sun. The occasional jogger, sweat-soaked and determined, pushed forward in the unforgiving weather, their steps heavy on the baking sidewalk. But most people sought refuge indoors, hidden away beneath the cool hum of air conditioners sipping iced tea in the shade of their porches. Yet, amidst this stifling heat, beneath the sprawling branches of a sycamore tree that offered only a teasing hint of relief, a small figure sat patiently beside a makeshift lemonade stand. Amari adjusted the edges of the thin cotton dress that hung loosely over her slender frame, its fabric too large for her now. Once it had fit snugly, a favorite piece she twirled in, laughing as the hem flared out like a dancer's skirt. But that was before. Before the weight loss, before the hospital visits, before she learned words like chemotherapy and remission. Now it draped over her bony shoulders, slipping every so often, requiring a tug to keep it in place. She wasn't supposed to be out in the sun for long. The doctors had warned her mother about exposure, about the toll it could take on her already fragile immune system. But Amari had insisted. She had a plan, and when she made up her mind about something, there was no changing it. The lemonade stand was simple, nothing more than a rickety wooden table that had seen better days, draped with an old polka-dotted cloth. A glass pitcher sat at the center, beads of condensation sliding lazily down its surface, the golden liquid inside bright and inviting. Beside it, a neat stack of plastic cups stood at attention, their edges slightly uneven. And at the front of the table, secured with strips of tape, was a handmade sign, its letters bold and a little wobbly, drawn with the careful determination of a child. Lemonade for Hope. Beneath those words, in smaller writing, a simple explanation. Raising money for medical treatment. Amari had spent all morning perfecting that sign. She had wanted it to be colorful, to catch the eye of anyone passing by. She had even drawn a little smiling sun in the corner, its rays extending outward in bright yellow streaks. Hope. That was what she needed. Her mother had watched her from the front steps, worry etched deep in the lines of her face. "You don't have to do this, baby," she had said gently, kneeling beside her daughter. "We'll find a way." But Amari had only shaken her head, her small fingers gripping the marker just a little tighter. "I can help," she had whispered. And so now she sat there, her small hands resting on her lap, fingers idly tracing the grooves of the table's surface as she waited. At first, there was nothing but the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant hum of cicadas. Cars passed by, their drivers barely glancing in her direction. A man walking his dog slowed just enough to read the sign before moving on. Still, Amari remained hopeful. The first customer came slowly, shuffling towards the stand with careful steps, a cane tapping rhythmically against the sidewalk. Mrs. Henderson, who lived 2 doors down, was a kind woman with a face full of soft wrinkles and eyes that always seemed to twinkle with quiet amusement. "Well, now, what do we have here?" she mused, peering down at the setup. "Lemonade, ma'am," Amari answered, sitting up a little straighter. "It's $1 a cup." Mrs. Henderson smiled warmly and reached into her purse, pulling out a crisp $5 bill. "I'll take one, sweetheart," she said, and you keep the change." Amari's fingers trembled slightly as she poured the lemonade, careful not to spill. When she handed over the cup, Mrs. Henderson patted her hand gently. "You're a brave one," she murmured before turning to go, her cane tapping softly as she walked away. The second customer came not long after, a teenage boy on a bicycle who skidded to a stop in front of the stand. He looked at the sign, his brow furrowing slightly before he pulled a few coins from his pocket and tossed them into the jar. He didn't say much, just took the lemonade, gave a small nod, and rode off. It wasn't much, but it was something. Still, as the minutes stretched into an hour, Amari couldn't ignore the slow-sinking feeling creeping into her chest. The heat was growing heavier, pressing down on her shoulders, making her limbs feel sluggish. Sweat trickled down the back of her neck, and she reached up to adjust the wide-brimmed hat her mother had insisted she wear. A car slowed as it approached, and for a moment her heart lifted. But then it rolled past, leaving behind nothing but a faint gust of hot air and a swirl of dust. She exhaled, forcing a smile onto her face as she rearranged the cups, making them look as neat as possible. She wouldn't give up. She couldn't. Her mother had tried so hard to keep her spirits up, had reassured her again and again that they would find a way to pay for everything, that Amari didn't need to worry. But she had seen the late notices in the mail, the way her mother pressed her fingers to her temples after hanging up the phone. She had heard the quiet sobs at night when her mother thought she was asleep. Amari wasn't just doing this for herself. She was doing it for her mother, for the woman who had spent countless nights sleeping in an uncomfortable hospital chair just to be by her side, who had worked double shifts without complaint, who had never once let Amari see how scared she really was. So she stayed. Another jogger passed by, glancing at the stand but not stopping. A woman pushing a stroller slowed for a moment before continuing down the sidewalk. The lemonade in the pitcher had grown warm. The sign, which had seemed so bright that morning, now looked a little less vibrant beneath the unforgiving sun. Her legs ached. Her arms felt weak. But she stayed. She adjusted her sign one more time, sat up straight, and waited. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have imagined, was that her day was about to change in ways she never expected. That, at this very moment, someone was coming down the street. And he would turn her little lemonade stand into something far greater than she ever could have dreamed. The afternoon sun had reached its peak, a heavy golden orb suspended in a cloudless sky, its unrelenting rays turning the sidewalk into a scorching stretch of heat. The shade from the sycamore tree barely made a difference anymore, and the small oscillating fan Amari's mother had set up on the porch was too far away to offer any real relief. Her lemonade, once cool and inviting, had lost its chill, and the condensation on the glass pitcher had long since evaporated. She was exhausted. The morning's determination still lingered somewhere deep inside her, but it was becoming harder to hold on to. Her legs ached from sitting on the hard plastic stool. Her arms felt heavy each time she poured a cup, and a dull pressure had begun to form at the back of her head, the kind that often signaled she needed to rest. But she couldn't. Not yet. A few more cars passed, one slowing just enough to glance at her sign before speeding away. A couple walked by on the other side of the street, deep in conversation, unaware of the little girl sitting behind the stand, waiting. She sighed and straightened her sign again, though there was no reason to. The edges were curling slightly at the corners from the heat, and the bright colors she had so carefully drawn that morning now looked muted under the relentless sun. A movement in the distance caught her eye. At first, she thought it was just another passerby, another person who would glance in her direction and keep walking. But as the figure grew closer, she realized something was different. He moved with slow, deliberate steps, his broad shoulders swaying slightly, his long strides effortless despite the heat. Even from a distance, he seemed larger than life. It wasn't just his height, though he was tall, impossibly so. It was the way he carried himself with a kind of quiet confidence that made him stand out among the other pedestrians. His presence was commanding without being intimidating, his movements smooth, unhurried. As he approached, she could see more details, the dark sunglasses shielding his eyes, the neatly trimmed beard, the loose-fitting athletic shirt stretched across his broad chest. A gold watch glinted on his wrist as he walked, catching the sunlight in quick, dazzling flashes. Amari sat up straighter, her breath catching in her throat. He stopped in front of her stand, tilting his head slightly as he read the sign. She swallowed, suddenly aware of how small she was compared to him. The man crouched slightly, resting his hands on his knees so that their eyes were level, though his sunglasses still obscured his expression. "You sellin' lemonade?" His voice was deep, rich, carrying the weight of someone who had lived a life filled with stories. Amari nodded, forcing her voice to work. "Yes, sir. It's $1 a cup." A slow smile spread across his face. He reached for a plastic cup, lifting the pitcher himself as he poured, the golden liquid filling the cup with a soft splash. He took a sip, smacked his lips together thoughtfully, then nodded. "Not bad," he said. "You make this yourself?" Amari hesitated. "My mom helped." "Smart woman." He took another sip, savoring it, then looked at the sign again. His sunglasses hid his expression, but something in the way his shoulders shifted made her think he was reading more than just the words. He was seeing her. "So," he said, placing the empty cup back on the table, "what's this all about?" Amari hesitated again. She had answered the question a few times that day, but never to someone like him. Somehow it felt different now. She pointed to the sign. "It's for my chemo," she said simply, her voice steady but quiet. "I'm trying to help my mom and dad so they don't have to worry so much." For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then, without a word, he reached into his pocket. At first, she thought he was going to hand her a few dollars, maybe a 5 or a 10 like Mrs. Henderson had. But when he pulled out his wallet and unfolded a thick stack of bills, her breath caught. The world seemed to slow as he peeled off not one, not two, but an entire handful of crisp $100 bills. Amari's heart pounded in her chest. One by one, he placed them into the donation jar, the weight of them making the glass shift slightly on the table. The jar, which had once held a scattering of crumpled ones and a few coins, now contained more money than Amari had ever seen in her life. When he was done, he straightened, adjusting his watch with an easy flick of his wrist. "That should help a little," he said. Amari's mouth was dry. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. She looked at the jar, at the neat stack of bills inside, and back up at the man towering over her. "Sir?" Her voice cracked and she stopped, blinking rapidly. The man smiled, the kind of smile that reached all the way to his eyes, even behind the sunglasses. "Don't worry about it, kid," he said. "Just keep being you." That was when someone in the small but growing crowd murmured something, just loud enough for the words to ripple outward. "Wait a minute. Is that Shaquille O'Neal?" The energy around them shifted in an instant. People turned, eyes widening, heads craning for a better look. Phones appeared as bystanders scrambled to snap photos and record videos. The quiet street, which had been still just moments ago, buzzed with excitement. Amari didn't fully understand what was happening. She had heard his name before, had seen his face somewhere, maybe on the TV in the hospital waiting room or on the cereal boxes at the grocery store. But standing here in front of her, larger than life, he was just a man who had stopped at her lemonade stand and done something extraordinary. The voices around them grew louder, but Shaq didn't seem fazed. He crouched again so that he was at her eye level once more. "You keep doing what you're doing, Amari," he said. "The world needs more people like you." Then, with the same calm ease that he had arrived, he stood and turned, walking away as if he hadn't just turned her lemonade stand into something incredible. Amari watched him go, her hands gripping the edge of the table as the noise of the crowd swirled around her. Her heart still hammered in her chest, and her mind struggled to catch up with what had just happened. She looked back at the jar. It was almost overflowing. And that was only the beginning. The moment Shaquille O'Neal walked away, the street seemed to come alive in a way it hadn't before. The still, sleepy summer afternoon was suddenly electric, charged with murmurs, whispers, and the frantic tapping of fingers on smartphone screens. People who had merely been passing by now stopped in their tracks, drawn in by the energy of the scene unfolding before them. Amari sat frozen behind her lemonade stand, her small hands gripping the edge of the table as she tried to process what had just happened. The glass jar in front of her, which had once contained only a few crumpled dollar bills and some scattered coins, was now stuffed with crisp $100 bills, so full that some of the money had begun to spill over the top. The weight of it was almost surreal. "That was Shaq, wasn't it?" someone asked, their voice tinged with disbelief. Another person, a woman with sunglasses perched atop her head, leaned in closer. Did he really just leave all that money? The realization was spreading like wildfire. A young man in a baseball cap who had been watching from across the street pulled out his phone and began typing furiously. A couple, standing near the curb, exchanged wide-eyed glances before turning their attention to Amari, their expressions shifting from shock to something softer, something like admiration. And then, as if some invisible barrier had been broken, the people around her began to move. A man in a button-down shirt approached first, pulling out his wallet. He glanced at Amari, at the sign she had so carefully written that morning, then at the jar filled with Shaq's donation. Without a word, he slipped in a few bills of his own, nodding at her before stepping back. The woman with sunglasses followed, pulling a 20 from her purse and tucking it into the overflowing jar. Then another person and another. The ripple effect had begun. At first, Amari barely had time to react. She was still reeling, still struggling to find her breath. But as more and more people came forward, as more hands reached into purses and pockets to add to her growing collection of donations, she felt something warm bloom in her chest. Hope. It started small, just a flicker, but as the minutes passed it grew, spreading through her like sunlight breaking through a storm. A woman pushing a stroller stopped and knelt beside the table, her eyes kind. "Sweetheart, I saw what happened. What's your name?" "Amari," she answered, her voice small but steady. The woman smiled. "Well, Amari, I think you're doing something really special here." She reached into her diaper bag and pulled out a crisp $50 bill, folding it neatly before placing it among the others. Amari blinked up at her, speechless, and the woman gave her a gentle pat on the hand before standing and moving aside to let others step forward. And they did. A man in a USPS uniform, her neighborhood mailman, Mr. Carter, arrived next, his face splitting into a wide grin as he walked up to the stand. "Now, Miss Amari," he said, reaching into his pocket, "I usually bring the mail, but today I think I'm the one delivering something special." He dropped a 50 into the jar and winked. She couldn't believe what was happening. The crowd continued to grow. Neighbors who had only ever exchanged polite waves now lingered, chatting with one another, shaking their heads in amazement at what they had just witnessed. Word was spreading, moving beyond this quiet street, beyond the cluster of houses and the local shops. Amari didn't understand how quickly things worked on the internet, but she was about to find out. Just a few blocks away, inside a cozy cafe with mismatched chairs and the smell of fresh coffee in the air, a college student sat hunched over his phone. He had been scrolling mindlessly through his social media feed when he saw the first post. Just a simple picture someone had taken of Shaq standing in front of a little girl's lemonade stand, a caption hastily typed beneath it. Shaq just dropped a stack of cash at this little girl's lemonade stand in Atlanta. Y'all, she's raising money for her chemo. Someone help me find her. He paused, reread it, then tapped the share button. Within minutes, the post had exploded. The photo was shared, reshared, retweeted, and reposted across platforms. People in coffee shops, in grocery store lines, in waiting rooms, and at bus stops saw it pop up on their screens. Some scrolled past, but others stopped, their fingers hovering over the image, their hearts catching on the words, "Raising money for her chemo." By the time the local news station picked it up, the movement had already begun. Back at the lemonade stand, Amari was still serving customers, her hands moving on autopilot as cup after cup of lemonade was poured, her donation jar growing heavier by the second. Her mother had stepped outside now, standing a few feet away, her hands pressed together over her chest as she watched everything unfold, her expression a mix of astonishment and deep, overwhelming emotion. She caught Amari's eye, and in that moment, nothing needed to be said. The little girl had set out that morning with a simple goal, to do whatever she could to help, to ease even a fraction of the burden her family was carrying. She had expected a few sales, a handful of kind strangers, maybe enough money to make a small difference. She had not expected this. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting the street in long golden shadows, a car pulled up to the curb. A man in a suit stepped out, carrying a small microphone, a cameraman following closely behind him. He glanced at the lemonade stand, at the growing crowd, then back at the little girl sitting behind the table. He smiled. "Are you Amari?" She nodded. "Well," he said, crouching to her level, "I think the whole world is about to know your name." She didn't know it yet, but her story was no longer just hers. It belonged to the people now, the ones who had stopped to help, the ones who had shared her story online, the ones who had read about her and felt moved to do something, anything, to make a difference. And the ripple was still spreading. By the time the sun dipped low over the rooftops, painting the sky in hues of burnt orange and dusky violet, Amari's lemonade stand had become something much larger than she had ever imagined. What had started as a quiet, almost lonely effort to help her mother with medical bills had turned into a movement. The street, once still and sleepy in the afternoon heat, was now alive with energy. People lingered on the sidewalk, chatting in hushed but excited tones. Cars slowed as they passed, some even pulling over as passengers leaned out their windows, trying to catch a glimpse of the little girl who had captured the city's attention. News crews had arrived, setting up cameras on the curb, their equipment humming softly as reporters spoke into microphones. A woman in a navy blue blazer, her hair neatly curled at her shoulders, adjusted her earpiece before flashing a bright smile at the camera. "We are live in Atlanta, where an incredible story has taken over social media, she announced. What started as a simple lemonade stand run by 8-year-old Amari Harris has turned into a citywide show of generosity, all sparked by an unexpected visit from NBA legend Shaquille O'Neal earlier today. The former basketball star stopped at the stand, donated a staggering amount of money, and the reporter's voice faded into the background as Amari focused on the scene in front of her. People were still coming, each with a story, a purpose. Some had seen the viral post online, others had heard about it from a friend or a neighbor. Some simply wanted to be part of something good. A woman in scrubs, her ID badge clipped to the collar of her uniform, approached the table with a soft smile. She knelt so that she was at eye level with Amari. "I work at the Children's Hospital downtown," she said. "I saw your story and wanted to come meet you. You're incredibly brave. You know that?" Amari felt her face grow warm. She wasn't sure what to say to that. The nurse reached into her purse and pulled out a sealed envelope. "Some of my coworkers and I put this together," she explained. "We wanted to help." She placed the envelope into Amari's hands, gave her fingers a reassuring squeeze, and then stood, disappearing into the crowd before Amari could even think to open it. A few moments later, a man with salt and pepper hair, dressed in a tailored suit, stepped forward. His polished leather shoes stood out sharply against the uneven pavement. He looked like someone important. He held out a business card to Amari's mother. "My name is Greg Marshall. I run a nonprofit that helps families with medical expenses. We'd love to talk to you about covering the rest of Amari's treatment costs." Her mother, who had been standing beside the lemonade stand all this time, clutching her hands tightly together, stared at the card as if it were some kind of illusion. "Covering—" Her voice cracked and she cleared her throat, blinking rapidly. "All of it?" Greg nodded. "Every cent." The breath she had been holding escaped in a quiet sob. She pressed the card to her chest as if afraid it might vanish, then turned to her daughter, eyes shining with a kind of relief that Amari hadn't seen in a long time. The donations kept coming, flowing in from every direction. People handed her money with quiet words of encouragement, some slipping folded bills into the donation jar, others placing checks into her hands. Even the local coffee shop owner had sent over a tray of drinks, passing out iced coffees and lemonades to the crowd that had gathered. But it wasn't just about the money anymore. A young boy, no older than 10, stepped up to the stand with a few crumpled dollar bills in his fist. He hesitated before setting them down on the table. His shirt was a little too big, his sneakers scuffed at the toes. He bit his lip and looked at Amari. "My little sister had cancer," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "She got better, though. I want to help you get better, too." Amari swallowed past the lump in her throat. "Thank you." The boy nodded and turned away, disappearing into the crowd before she could say anything else. She looked down at the money in the donation jar, at the envelope still clutched in her hands, at the people still standing in line waiting to give, waiting to tell her that she wasn't alone. Somewhere in the distance, her mother was speaking to one of the reporters, her voice shaking but steady as she tried to explain what this meant for them. Amari didn't need to hear the words to know. This was hope. It was the warm weight of a nurse's hand on hers. It was a young boy's quiet generosity. It was the woman who had left her shift at the hospital just to come meet her. The man in the suit offering help without expectation. The strangers who had come together for no other reason than to lift up a little girl they had never met. It was bigger than her. Bigger than Shaq. Bigger than anything she could have dreamed when she had first set up her little wooden table that morning. Somewhere deep inside, she understood that this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about what people could do when they believed in something good. And this, she thought, was only the beginning. The world changed for Amari in ways she never could have imagined. By the next morning, their small house was flooded with phone calls, messages, and visitors. The night before, her mother had finally turned off the porch light and carried Amari inside, though she had barely been able to sleep, her head still spinning from the whirlwind of the day. She had lain in bed, staring up at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of her mother pacing in the kitchen, answering late-night calls from reporters and well-wishers. When she awoke, she found her mother sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of envelopes. Some were neatly opened, their contents spread out in small piles. Others were still sealed, waiting to be read. There were handwritten letters, printed notes, and checks, so many checks. Amari rubbed her eyes and slid into a chair across from her mother. "Good morning, baby," her mother said, her voice soft and a little tired, but her smile warm. Amari looked at the table. "What is all this?" Her mother exhaled, shaking her head as she picked up one of the letters. People who saw what happened yesterday and wanted to help." She glanced at one of the envelopes, running her thumb over the handwritten address. Some of them sent money. Some just wrote to say they were praying for you. Amari hesitated before reaching for a letter of her own. It was from a little girl named Kayla, written in bright purple ink, the letters large and uneven. "Hi, Amari. I saw your lemonade stand and wanted to tell you that you are really brave. I hope you feel better soon. I'm sending you my $5 allowance to help. Love, Kayla, age 7. Amari's fingers tightened around the edges of the letter. Her mother watched her carefully. "There are hundreds of these." She swallowed, glancing around at the piles of envelopes. "Maybe thousands, from all over the country. Maybe even from outside the country. I haven't had time to check." Amari blinked. "All for me?" Her mother reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "For you, and for kids like you." That was when it hit her. This wasn't just about her anymore. She thought back to the little boy who had come to her lemonade stand the day before, the one who had given his crumpled dollar bills in memory of his sister. She thought of Kayla, who had sent her whole allowance just to help a girl she had never met. She thought of Shaq, kneeling down to meet her eyes, telling her that the world needed more people like her. Her fingers curled around the letter, and she took a deep breath. What if we did something bigger? Her mother's brow furrowed slightly. "What do you mean, baby?" Amari licked her lips. "What if we helped other kids too? The ones like me, the ones whose families can't pay for everything." She hesitated, gathering her thoughts. "I mean, we have so much now, more than we ever thought we'd have. And it's not just us. People want to help. Maybe we could make something out of this." Her mother stared at her for a long moment, something flickering behind her tired eyes. Then, slowly, a small, knowing smile spread across her lips. "I think," she said carefully, "that might be the best idea I've ever heard." The next few days moved faster than Amari could keep up with. The nonprofit organization that had offered to pay for her treatment officially stepped in, ensuring that her mother would never again have to worry about hospital bills, co-pays, or medications. The weight that had been pressing on their family for so long, an invisible, suffocating burden, was suddenly lifted. But that was only the beginning. With the extra money that had poured in from donations, Amari and her mother set up a fund. It started small, just a local effort, a way to help other families who were struggling with the same impossible decisions they had faced. But word spread quickly. Other children, inspired by Amari's story, began setting up their own lemonade stands, raising money to donate to what soon became known as Lemonade for Hope. The name stuck. Businesses took notice, offering sponsorships. A national lemonade brand reached out, wanting to support the foundation by donating a portion of their sales. Schools held fundraisers. Churches and community groups organized lemonade stand events, with all proceeds going to families in need. And through it all, Amari was at the heart of it, guiding something that had once been nothing more than a small table on a quiet street into a movement that stretched far beyond what she had ever imagined. She still had treatments to go through, still had days where the weight of her illness made her feel smaller than she wanted to be. But now, she wasn't alone. She had an entire community, an entire network of people who had come together because of a single act of kindness, because of a man who had stopped at a lemonade stand and decided to make a difference. Months later, at a charity event held to celebrate the official launch of Lemonade for Hope, Amari stood on a small stage, a microphone clutched in her slightly trembling hands. The crowd was larger than anything she had ever spoken in front of before. Hundreds of faces turned toward her, waiting. She took a deep breath. "Hi, everyone," she began, her voice small at first, then stronger. "I just wanted to say thank you. When I started my lemonade stand, I just wanted to help my mom and dad. I didn't think so many people would care." She paused, scanning the sea of faces in front of her. "But you did. And now we get to help other kids like me. We get to give them hope. So, thank you for believing in me." The applause was deafening, and at the very back of the crowd, standing tall with the baseball cap pulled low over his forehead, was Shaquille O'Neal. He said nothing, did nothing to draw attention to himself. He simply watched, a quiet smile on his face, knowing that he had only been the first drop in the ripple that had changed everything. As the event wrapped up, a reporter approached Amari with a final question. "What's the biggest thing you've learned through all of this?" She thought for a moment before answering. "I learned that it doesn't matter how small you are," she said finally. "You can always do something to help. And when people help each other, amazing things can happen." Her words would be repeated in newspapers, in interviews, in social media posts that spread far beyond what she could ever comprehend. They became the slogan for Lemonade for Hope, a message that resonated with children and adults alike. And as she stepped off the stage into the arms of her mother, she knew this was just the beginning of something even bigger. Not just for her, for everyone. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe for more inspiring tales. Check out our other videos for more incredible stories, and don't forget to share this one with your friends and family.